then, hi Mark, and welcome to our episode today. First question, what are you drinking?
So today I have gone for a Hawkshead Brewery Windermere Pale. There you are.
Okay.
Quite a light one, 3.5%, refreshing and hoppy.
Great. Well, my one is a Gypsy Hill Felder, which is basically a Weiss beer.
Oh yeah.
So we'll see
Sounds
how that goes. So welcome everybody to our episode today. We're going to carry on in the ecosystem theme, but this time we're going to build on our previous episode on social enterprises by looking at social enterprises in the wider context. Why now with social enterprise? What does the ecosystem need to look like? What do we need to make them successful going forward? And so I'm going to be asking Mark all of these questions because he has led on social enterprises at Oxford and is a leader in the university spin-out social enterprise space in the UK and Europe in general. So it should be very good.
I hope so.
So
I don't know exactly what I'm going to say, but anyway, let's go for it and let's see what comes out of the mouth.
Brilliant. Right.
All right.
So Mark, Oxford University's Technology Transfer Office has existed for about 50 years doing licenses and spin-outs, but social enterprises have only started about 4 years ago, a very small chunk of its lifetime. Why now?
Why now? Well, so one of the key things that's been driving everything has been the Research Excellence Framework, which is the assessment that's undertaken, called REF for short, where a lot of funding is awarded to universities based on the impact that they make. And so 25% of the funding is awarded to the impact that the research makes. And social enterprise, what was key to what the university wanted to do was it wanted to broaden its impact. So from the Social Sciences and Humanities division, they wanted to see more impact coming from the work that we're doing. They approached OUI, what was it, 5 or 6 years ago now, to see what could be done. And it was perfectly clear that social enterprise was an untapped vehicle for doing things, growing the impact. And the impact is measured essentially in breadth and depth. So and social enterprise is a very good way of the university being able to broaden its impact in different ways and making that impact happen on different communities where the mainstream venture capital model doesn't necessarily work. And it works perfectly, very, very well for social sciences and humanities as a good fit, but it's also a good fit for the medical sciences as well. And we're also increasingly seeing some physical sciences social enterprises being created. So there's that element as well. The other good thing about them is the reputation that the university will have as a consequence of doing it. It's trying to do good things, it's trying to make a positive change on the world, and social enterprises are a good way of doing that. It's not, social enterprises are often structured so that a huge amount of profit isn't necessarily generated from them, or it's recycled towards the cause, which is good for its reputation. So it's not just about making money. And the second thing is, because social enterprises are set up with the mission and purpose, it essentially protects the university's reputation from all the bad things, because the mission and purpose guides the directors in what it is that they are doing. And if the mission and purpose, as it almost always is to make a positive societal change, then that is going to make the university relax a little bit more about how creating these ventures. And so it's essentially a win-win for them.
Absolutely. And obviously they carry the same benefits that spin-outs do, because if you want the impact to endure, ideally sustainably, you have to basically create a legal entity that's going to run itself, run the operations, and hopefully be financially sustainable. But perhaps particularly with social enterprises, they often don't operate in the UK. So it's essential that you basically do create separate legal entities so they can operate in whichever jurisdiction they're trying to deliver their intervention, be that somewhere in sub-Saharan Africa or Latin America or Asia, etc.
Yeah, it's a mechanism of building the partnerships abroad that are necessary, and having that vehicle which is very much separate from what the core functions of the university are, which is for teaching and research. But a mechanism of delivering the impact with partners is actually a really good way to go.
Now, social enterprises didn't just exist in a kind of university bubble. I think it'd be fair to say there are a number of trends in kind of, at least in the UK, but realistically globally, around these ventures, such as, you know, we've seen the rise of impact capital, we've seen the rise of tech for good. What can you talk a bit about which are the ones that you think are relevant for the sort of spin outs that we do? What are the kind of forces coinciding that make this possible? Because we could just push them out and there could be nothing for them and they could fall flat on their face.
I mean, it's a hugely complex picture, because social enterprise sit at that boundary between mainstream companies and charities. But the thing is, in different jurisdictions, the separation between charities and the mainstream, the gap is smaller or bigger depending on what the legal construct is in a particular country. So if you were to take the United States, for instance, the 501c3, the charity vehicle there, has a much broader or a flexible definition of charity than it does in the UK, where it is much more contained and precise and more regulated. It's still very heavily regulated in the US, but not in the same way as it is in the UK. And likewise, at the mainstream end, that's a bit broader as well. So the space for social enterprise in the US, for instance, is narrower than it is here. But if you look across, if you look across the world, where are the is social enterprise becoming a thing? South Korea is a place where they're pushing it quite a lot. Australia has been, and New Zealand have been pushing it quite a lot in the early days. Canada is probably right at the vanguard of it. They set up an investment fund in Canada 20 years ago. So at least 10 years before the UK were heavily getting involved with big society capital and that sort of thing. The Netherlands have got a social enterprise ecosystem which is growing exponentially, has different elements within its ecosystem, some of which we don't have and they do, and vice versa, things we have that they don't. And also Germany, certainly around Berlin, lots of social impact incubators and accelerators starting up, and across the other major cities in Germany as well. So the legal forms are different in each country because company structures are different in each country, and so the opportunity and the flavour of the social enterprises that you get there are very different. In the UK, a lot was driven by David Cameron's Big Society push when he came to power in 2010. He created Big Society Capital, which is a funder of funds. So it's there to fund, social enterprises, companies with purpose, and to enable them to have the capital to do so. So what Big Society Capital does, it actually puts big chunks of money into funds where the impact is delivered primarily in the UK. So that is what was set up, and it's still going now. It got about £650 million, if I remember rightly, and as a consequence, a lot of impact investment funds have been set up in the UK, as well as you have foundations and you have family offices and so on and so forth, putting money towards impact investing, good causes, and so on.
Do you think, you mentioned sort of philanthropic foundations, etc. Do you think there's good understanding of a university social enterprise within the kind of financial ecosystem in the UK? Do they know what one is? Do they care? No,
and that's the I mean, you get a variation in the types of social enterprises across the UK. It's fair to say that most of the ones that I've come across are more towards the charity end of the spectrum in the UK than, for instance, a more right wing, or more something closer to mainstream capital, for-profit social enterprises, for instance. And so the social enterprises are community driven. They're there to solve problems, but they are very locally focused. They don't necessarily have the option or the ability to scale, and they don't necessarily have business models which make them self-sustaining without grants and donations, in part. So so branding yourself as a social enterprise in itself might associate yourself with those sorts of types of companies, whereas the social enterprises that we are creating, as well as creating the ones that are non-profits, which will look like charities, we'd also have these where we actually are developing business models where they are self-sustaining, where investors who put money in would be able to get a healthy return, but also be able to make a significant impact as well. But the one thing that is different is that, as we mentioned in the Impact 12 podcast, which was universities will build as much value within them before actually just creating a spin out. So you'll have an intervention, a technology which has got a minimum viable product or a methodology which is tested. But when we start the company, there'll be no income going through that company. And the types of investment that are available to those types of companies where they're ready to go, it's just not there. It's just not there at the moment. So that's why we created the fund.
That's why we created Impact 12, precisely to solve that problem. Are you hoping, though, that Impact 12 sort of crowds in other investors? Because one thing that we always talk about is that it's not just the capital that the funds need. They frankly need the guidance and expertise, because when you normally go to an investor, that's one of the main benefits, is a very wise hand, hopefully, kind of helping steer the ship. What's your ambitions to kind of get the expertise and the guidance? And is there still an education aspect to it, where they begin to understand what and if a university social enterprise is different from maybe others that they've seen?
Yes, there is. For instance, it's de-risked through a proven methodology or technology that's different. Already having your stakeholders, your business model mapped out, and knowing roughly how you're going to start, that's different. Having something that is scalable, something that, yes, it works in this community that you've tested on, but it's also something that can be adapted and transferred to other places, so it's scalable and so you can build and create a bigger impact. These are the sorts of things that will come out of universities. And yes, there is an education and a mentorship element and friends that are needed around the ventures, the ecosystem, the fund, in order to help these things grow. And that's why the Impact 12 Fund is important, because it's there essentially planting a flag saying, we are doing this thing here, we're launching a blaze of publicity. Who else wants to play? Who else wants to join? Who thinks that they can help? And it's there it's essentially to advertise and to draw people's attention to this different type of company that is being created out of universities.
Do you think there is a risk that there's a lot of funds actually being kind of created, particularly in the UK, sort of saying that they're going to be impact focused or mission focused, and sometimes it's a little hard to know what that means. And I always go back to sort of thinking about some of the issues with ESG financing, whereby initially everyone was like, great, all this finance is going to become ESG, which everyone knows is basically environmental, social and governance. It's meant to capital that is more responsible and trying to be sustainable. And basically a lot of finance in the world, a lot of the assets have come under this. So you'd think that the world economy is going to be under better hands, but really a lot of people are just badging up things as they were and now calling them ESG. Do you think there's that same risk with social enterprise investment, where investors kind of say that they're really passionate about whatever the intervention is, but in practice they just focus on the most for-profit ventures that they can find, and as a result weaken the name?
There is, and that's what you get when you play in the middle, and that's what we're doing here. We're playing in the middle between charity and mainstream, and charity is all about making impact and just getting, and trying to get donations and fundraising done that way. And the mainstream is, as it still is, it's still about just making money. We're going to have to break this down into lots of different elements. The first thing is that mainstream companies are now recognizing the need that they need to show that they care, and that this greenwashing is becoming more and more of a thing, that you can't get away with doing that sort of thing anymore. That doesn't mean to say that people aren't trying, that people are trying, that there are certain organizations out there who are branding themselves as being for impact and things like that, but actually it's not thorough or exactly what what we're trying to do here. And the key to all of this is the measurement. Is actually, you need to be able to measure the impact. Just as you have an accountant for your math, for your money, you need an accountant for your impact as well. You need to have a well understood mechanism of measuring the impact, that it is assured, and that everybody agrees that that impact has actually been made, and what you've done has contributed to it, right? Go on.
So that does bring me neatly onto my next question. How do we currently measure impact at OUI? For our firms, for our ventures.
So for our ventures, we get reports from the board, and we're observers on the board, and we can see how much they're selling, who they're selling it to, how many people it's affecting. So for instance, if there's a drug company, we'll be able to see what's going on there. I mean, to be fair, with drug companies, we don't actually ever sell any drugs to anyone through the duration of the company. That will be that will be exited to a big pharmaceutical before it provides anything. But we get reports in. There are sales. We can therefore abstract to how many people the intervention, the technology has gone to, and then we can make an estimate on what the depth is. And but these are things which are done in response to requests from the university who want to put together an impact case for the Research Excellence Framework. It's not something that is actively tracked at the moment. It is something that is done reactively when people are asking for those sorts of information. And the reason for that is that it's very difficult to get startup companies to report on anything, quite frankly. It takes time. It takes time, and a lot of them are fighting for survival. They're trying to work out what they're going to do for the next investment round. Actually reporting on to a university on how many people they've affected so far is just sort of far down the priority list. When PAYE are knocking on your door asking why you haven't paid a bill, for instance, it just gets lost. So it's actually very difficult to get that hold of that data. But at the same time, there is definitely a shift nationally and internationally that data is becoming increasingly important, and that companies are going to have to be able to report on it, and OUI startups are going to have to do it, and spin-outs are going to have to do it, just as large corporations like Danone are going to.
Well, but then that brings me to my next question. Impact as a word is just kind of extremely broad and could really mean anything. It could mean an asteroid hitting the Earth even. What's the framework that is there a framework, and what framework are we going to use to decide whether something is a social enterprise and how we should measure it, or what are we working towards there?
So you're asking that question right at the point where we're trying to work out how to do it. One of the things I'm trying to push is, as even though it's not perfect, that the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and specifically their indicators, are a good mechanism of trying to work out what impact is being made. If you actually, UN Sustainable Development Goals are quite broad at the top level. Health and well-being is number 3, for instance. Poverty, zero poverty is number 1. But it's only when you abstract it down to what the targets are, and then the indicators are within that target, that you're actually able to measure something, which is, well, this is how I am measuring my impact. This is the number of people I have brought out of poverty. This is the number in health and well-being. How much The suicide rate has gone down, for instance. That's one of the indicators. And these are these things they're designed to be national level indicators so that governments can report on what it is that they do to stimulate answering the Sustainable Development Goals. But the usefulness in the data is the disaggregated data. It's where it's been broken down into, well, how many homeless people are there on the streets of Oxford? And actually, you could actually have an intervention which removes or helps people, off the streets. And it actually, with a startup, it could make actually a big dent in the Oxford numbers. And those are the sorts of things that I want our startups and spin-outs to be able to measure. A sensible, realistic measure of how they are actually making an impact. And then the question becomes, well, yes, it's worked in Oxford, or it's worked in a village in Bangladesh. How do we then scale it? How do we do it to other villages in Bangladesh, or how do we deploy it in Bristol and London and Edinburgh, and just demonstrating that the methodology works and measuring the impact on a small scale, but also being able to demonstrate what the potential is. And I think that's what we've got to be able to do with our impact measurement. A precise measurement of what impact has actually been made on a small scale, but also being able to demonstrate the potential of the impact of an intervention or technology.
So we know there's a finance gap, and obviously Impact 12, we hope, will be part of the solution to that. What are the other kind of big things that you'd like to change, possibly at a sort of government level, to help these social enterprise spin-outs?
Well, I think that what we've got to look at is the potential of social enterprises to actually work alongside government to help solve a lot of the problems that they're trying to answer. For instance, in their levelling up agenda, there's the potential here for private enterprise to be able to solve, to contribute and to reduce the burden on the government by using sustainable business models to solve social and potentially environmental problems as well. But in order to do that, you need to be able to measure it. You need to be targeted and specific. And so you need a framework by which you measure the impact in a particular intervention in a particular area. A way that it's assured that everybody agrees that it can't be gamed, but a way, something that everybody agrees on, and where a reward is given to those social enterprises and or the people or organizations that invest in them to incentivize that to happen. So, for instance, you could say we have the enterprise investment scheme and the special enterprise investment scheme for mainstream ventures, and actually you could use that for social ventures as well. But it essentially gives investors a tax break, and if they go into startups, right? Could you do that for social enterprise as well? We've got social investment tax relief. If you have an accounting mechanism for measuring impact, and you can say that people are actually delivering, or organizations are delivering results, could corporate investors, for instance, use their CSR budget and get an SITR write-off on an investment into a startup which is solving, I don't know, homelessness in Rochdale, or the education of children in disadvantaged areas of the UK, to bring them back up to speed on their math skills after COVID, for instance, right? These are big problems, social problems that the government is grappling with now. And if more of tax policy, company policy, and corporate policy, and the frameworks within which they all work is aligned for impact, then the better things will be, and the more problems will be solved.
How would you know we're on the right track in 3 years' time? What would you be looking for?
What I'd want to see is data. One of the big things, people talk about impact, and if you were to ask, right, give me some impact data, give me some ESG data, it's a black hole. Nobody can see what's going on there. And in order to map all these interventions and make an improvement on society, first of all, you've got to diagnose what everything is, the situation is in the first place. And we don't know. Maybe people don't want to know. But I think the first thing that people need to do is to work out, well, yes, we've got all these ideas. We need to be able to, and this is the situation across the country or internationally at the moment. This is where we are now. And then being able to come up with a mechanism of seeing where the problems are and then being in a good position to address them and measure them afterwards. And I think that's realistic expectation over 3 years.
Brilliant. Mark Mann, thank you.
Thank you very much.